"Stand next to me," he said quietly, his voice calm in a way that made people listen without realizing why. "And don't look nervous." I wasn't nervous. I was terrified. Because the man standing beside me wasn't just rich, or powerful, or influential. He was the kind of man people lowered their voices around. The kind of man no one questioned. And somehow, I was his date. Fake. Temporary. A role I had agreed to play just 72 hours ago. But as the grand doors of the wedding hall opened and a sea of elegantly dressed guests turned to look at us, something shifted. Heads tilted. Conversations paused. Eyes followed. Not him. Me. I tightened my grip on the clutch in my hand, forcing myself to breathe as flashes of cameras flickered across the room. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to blend in. Stay quiet. Look pretty enough to pass, but not enough to stand out. That was the deal. So why did it feel like every single person in that room was watching me like I didn't belong? And somehow, at the same time, like I was the only one who did. I leaned slightly toward him, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think people are staring." "They are," he replied, unfazed. "That's not part of the plan." His lips curved, just slightly. Not a smile. Something more dangerous. "It is now." And that's when I saw her. The bride. Standing across the room, frozen mid-laugh, her eyes locked on me instead of the man she was about to marry. That was the moment I realized something had gone very wrong. Because I thought I was just his fake date. Until everyone in that room started watching me instead of the bride. And the most dangerous man in that room, he wasn't looking at her either. He was looking at me, like this had never been fake at all. I wasn't supposed to be noticed. That had always been the safest way to exist in a city like this. Quiet, efficient, forgettable. You do your job, keep your head down, and leave before anyone has a reason to look too closely. That's how I survived. By the time I moved to Seoul, I had already learned that lesson the hard way. I worked as a junior event coordinator for a luxury firm that specialized in high-profile weddings, corporate galas, and private functions for people whose last names opened doors I couldn't even see. My job wasn't glamorous. It was the kind of role where you made sure everything looked perfect, without anyone realizing you were the one holding it together. Invisible, but necessary. At least, that's what I told myself. The truth was, I was replaceable. I still remember my first week on the job. I had spent hours preparing a proposal for a client. Carefully curated themes, detailed layouts, color palettes that blended modern elegance with traditional Korean aesthetics. I was proud of it. For once, I thought I had done something that might actually matter. When I presented it to my supervisor, she barely glanced at the pages. "This is good," she said flatly, sliding it aside. "But next time, let someone more experienced handle the creative direction." Someone more experienced. Or someone who looked like they belonged. Later that afternoon, I watched as the same proposal, my proposal, was presented to the client by someone else. Someone with the right accent, the right background, the kind of presence that made people nod before she even finished speaking. They loved it. Of course they did. I stood at the back of the room, holding a clipboard, pretending to take notes while they praised her ideas. My ideas. Smiling politely when someone glanced in my direction, as if I were just part of the staff hired to carry things. That was the first time I realized something. It didn't matter how hard I worked. In rooms like that, I was decoration. After that, the pattern became impossible to ignore. At events, I was the one adjusting table settings while guests discussed investments and family connections over champagne. I was the one fixing last-minute disasters while being spoken to like I wasn't quite equal. Not rude. Never outright rude. Just subtle. The kind of condescension that hides behind polite smiles. "You speak Korean very well," they'd say, surprised. As if I hadn't spent years studying it. As if effort could somehow erase the fact that I wasn't one of them. I learned how to smile through it. How to nod. How to make myself smaller in ways that didn't show. But inside, something was always burning. A quiet anger. Not loud enough to change anything, but strong enough to keep me from breaking completely. There were nights I would sit in my small apartment, heels kicked off by the door, replaying conversations in my head. thinking of all the things I could have said, all the moments I could have stood up for myself. But I never did, because I knew how that story ended. People like me didn't win those battles. We survived them. And survival meant knowing your place. The closest I ever got to their world was through the events we organized. Weddings especially. That's where the illusion was strongest. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, generational wealth wrapped in traditions that felt both beautiful and suffocating. I watched brides glide through rooms like they owned them. Watched their families exchange smiles that carried decades of power behind them. Watched men in tailored suits shake hands like they were sealing deals instead of celebrating love. Everything about it was precise, controlled, perfect, and completely out of reach. Sometimes, I would catch my reflection in the mirrored walls of those venues. Black dress, hair pulled back neatly, expression carefully neutral. I looked like I belonged there. Until someone spoke to me. "Can you bring more champagne to table 6? And just like that, the illusion shattered. I wasn't part of the world. I was part of the service. There was one event in particular that stayed with me. It was a private engagement party held at one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. The kind of place where the lighting alone probably cost more than my yearly rent. I had been assigned to coordinate the reception area, greeting guests, managing schedules, making sure everything flowed seamlessly. Halfway through the evening, a woman approached me. Elegant, impeccably dressed. The kind of presence that made people move without being asked. "You're the coordinator?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, straightening slightly. She looked me up and down, not rudely, just assessing. "You've done well," she said. "Everything looks beautiful." For a moment, something inside me lifted. "Thank you," I said. Then she smiled. "But next time, make sure someone like you isn't the first person guests see when they arrive." The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed like a slap. I nodded anyway. "Of course I did." "Of course," I said. "I'll keep that in mind." She walked away without another glance. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, my fingers tightening around the tablet in my hands. My chest felt hollow. Not surprised. Just tired. That was the thing about moments like that. They didn't shock you anymore. They confirmed what you already knew. You don't belong here. By the time the event ended, I had pushed it down where everything else went. Smiled through the closing, thanked the staff, completed the reports. Normal. Controlled. Invisible. But that night, as I stepped out of the hotel and into the cool air, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the city lights reflected off the glass buildings. Or the quiet that followed hours of pretending. Or maybe it was the simple, undeniable truth that I couldn't keep doing this forever. I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted more. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know how to get there. But I knew one thing. If I stayed exactly where I was, nothing would ever change. I adjusted my coat, took a breath, and turned back toward the hotel entrance to grab something I had forgotten inside. I had no idea that decision, so small, so insignificant, would lead me to the one person who would turn my entire life upside down. Because that was the night I met him. And everything started to change. The lobby was almost empty when I walked back in. Most of the guests had already moved upstairs or left for the night, and the staff was beginning to clear away the last traces of the event. The polished marble floors reflected the soft overhead lighting, and for once, the space felt quiet, neutral, like it wasn't watching me. I exhaled slowly, heading toward the reception desk where I'd left my folder. That's when I felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. A shift. The kind that makes your instincts sharpen before your mind catches up. I looked up, and saw him. He was seated in the far corner of the lobby, partially obscured by a tall arrangement of white orchids. At first glance, nothing about him seemed out of place. Dark suit. Relaxed posture. One hand resting against the arm of the chair as if he owned the space without needing to prove it. But then you looked closer. And you understood. People like him didn't need to demand attention. The room gave it to them anyway. A man stood a few feet behind him, not quite a bodyguard, but not just staff either. Still, alert, watching everything without appearing to. And then there was him, composed, still, dangerously calm. I should have looked away. I should have grabbed my folder and left. But I didn't, because for some reason, he was already looking at me. Not casually, not politely, directly, like he had been waiting. My steps slowed before I could stop them. This was ridiculous. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. There was no reason for that kind of attention to exist between strangers. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked into something I didn't understand. I forced myself to move, reaching the desk, picking up my folder with slightly unsteady hands. Leave. That's what I should have done. Instead, Mississippi. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the space effortlessly, pulling me to a stop before I could think better of it. I turned slowly. Yes. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he was intimidating in the obvious way. He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. That was the problem. He didn't have to. His gaze moved over me once, quick, precise, like he was assessing something only he could see. You coordinated tonight's event, he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. Yes. It was well executed. Simple. Direct. No unnecessary praise. No condescension either. Just acknowledgement. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Thank you, I managed. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It felt like something was building inside it. Then, sit. I blinked. I'm sorry. He gestured lightly to the chair across from him. That wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't harsh. But it wasn't optional either. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea. Every rule I had learned about staying invisible, staying safe, staying in my place, was screaming at me to walk away. So why didn't I? Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something reckless. I stepped forward and sat down. Up close, the air felt different. Charged. Controlled. He studied me again, quieter this time. You don't belong in rooms like this, he said. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. My jaw tightened slightly. I work in them. That's not the same thing. No. It wasn't. I looked away for a second, steadying myself. I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. I didn't need another reminder. But then he spoke again. You notice everything. I frowned slightly, caught off guard. Excuse me. Details, he continued. Movements. Reactions. You adjust before problems become visible. I stared at him. No one had ever said that to me before. They noticed when I failed. They noticed when I was out of place. But this was different. How would you know that? I asked carefully. His expression didn't change. I've been watching you. The words should have felt invasive. Instead, they felt unsettling in a different way. How long? I asked before I could stop myself. Long enough. Silence stretched again. Then he leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. I need someone like you. Every warning signal in my body went off at once. That sounds like the beginning of a very bad idea, I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Not amusement. Approval. It depends on your perspective. I stood up instinctively. I think I should go. Sit down. I didn't. I don't know who you are, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I don't take whatever this is. He didn't react to my resistance. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't try to stop me. He just said, my ex is getting married in 3 days. That stopped me. Not because it was shocking, but because it was so unexpected. I turned back slowly. What? I've been invited, he continued calmly, for appearances. I frowned. And I don't intend to go alone. The meaning clicked into place a second later. I stared at him. No. He didn't even pause. I haven't made the offer yet. You don't need to, I said quickly. The answer is no. Think carefully. I don't need to think. I'm not asking you to pretend to be something you're not. That made me hesitate. Just slightly. He leaned forward now, his voice lowering, not softer, but more precise. I'm asking you to stand beside me. That's all. That's not all, I said. People like you don't do things without a reason. Correct. Then what's yours? For the first time, he paused. Not long. Just enough to matter. Then I need someone they won't expect. The words settled between us. They'll be watching for status, he continued. Connections. Familiar faces. And I'm none of those things. Exactly. There it was. The truth. Simple. Clean. Unfiltered. I should have been offended. Instead, I felt something else. Opportunity. What do I get out of it? I asked quietly. His gaze sharpened slightly. A chance to walk into a room that would never open its doors to you, and be the one everyone remembers. My pulse quickened. He stood then, closing the distance between us just enough to make the air feel tight. 3 days, he said. 1 appearance. His voice dropped slightly. And I don't lose. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not arrogance. Certainty. I swallowed. This was insane. Reckless. Completely outside the life I had carefully built to protect myself. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. I took a slow breath. Then said, "What exactly would I have to do?" His lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. Be convincing. That should have scared me. Instead, I nodded. Fine. The word came out before I could second-guess it. Before I could pull back. Before I could remember all the reasons I should walk away. His gaze held mine for a second longer. Satisfied. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a card. No mistakes, he said. I took it. My fingers brushed his for the briefest moment, and something about that contact felt deliberate. Final. I didn't understand it yet. But I would. Soon enough. Because as I walked out of that hotel lobby, card in hand, heart racing in a way I couldn't explain, I realized something. I said yes, not knowing I had just stepped into something far bigger than a fake relationship. The first time I stepped into his world, I understood something immediately. This wasn't just about money. It was about precision. Everything, the lighting, the textures, the silence, felt intentional. Even the air in his penthouse seemed controlled, like nothing was allowed to exist there without purpose. I stood near the entrance longer than I should have, taking it in. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Minimalist furniture. Clean lines that somehow made everything feel more expensive. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It was quiet power. You're late. I turned. He was already watching me. Of course he was. I'm 2 minutes early, I said, glancing at my phone. Then you're early for the wrong version of yourself. I frowned slightly. I didn't realize there were versions. There are, he replied calmly. And the one who walks into that wedding can't hesitate at the door. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. This wasn't just preparation. This was reconstruction. Over the next few hours, I realized just how serious he was. A stylist arrived first. Then another. Clothes were brought in, dresses I didn't even want to touch at first, because they looked like they belonged in places I had never been allowed to exist. Try this, the stylist said, handing me something sleek, structured, undeniably expensive. I don't think. You don't need to think, he interrupted from across the room. You need to adapt. I hesitated, then took the dress. The first time I looked at myself in the mirror after changing, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She stood differently. Shoulders back. Chin slightly lifted. Like she expected to be seen. I shifted uncomfortably. This feels wrong. It feels unfamiliar, he corrected. There's a difference. I met his eyes in the mirror. People will know I don't belong. No, he said, stepping closer. People will know exactly what you show them. His voice lowered slightly. So stop showing them doubt. The words lingered longer than they should have, because they weren't entirely about the dress. Over the next 2 days, everything changed. How I walked, how I spoke, how I held eye contact without looking away first. He didn't teach me how to become someone else. He stripped away the habits that made me shrink. Again, he said as I crossed the room for the 3rd time. Slower. I am going slow. You're rushing because you're afraid to be watched. I stopped. That hit too close. He stepped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to meet his eyes. They will be watching, he said. Every step. Every expression. I know. Then stop trying to disappear. Something in my chest shifted. Not confidence. Not yet. But something close. By the end of the 2nd day, I noticed it. The way I moved through his space without hesitation. The way I held my posture without thinking. The way I met his gaze without immediately looking away. It wasn't just external anymore. Something internal was changing. And that scared me more than anything. Because this wasn't supposed to be real. Stand closer. I didn't move. I am standing close. You're standing beside me, he said. That's not the same thing. I exhaled slowly. And what exactly is the difference? Instead of answering, he stepped forward, closing the space between us in one smooth motion. My breath caught. This was different. Too close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that I became very aware of where my hands were, where my eyes were, where everything was. This, he said quietly, is what it looks like when people believe you. I swallowed. This is what it looks like when people stare, I corrected. They're the same thing. His hand moved, lightly, deliberately, resting at the small of my back. Not possessive. Not forceful. Just certain. My body reacted before my mind could. A slight shift. A subtle inhale. He noticed. Of course he did. Relax, he murmured. I am relaxed. You're calculating every movement. That's because you're watching every movement. A pause. Then, softer. I have to. Something about that made me look at him differently. For a moment, the tension shifted. But it didn't disappear. It deepened. Again, he said. We practiced everything. How he would guide me through a crowd. How I would lean slightly toward him during conversations. How our hands would brush just enough to feel natural, but not staged. At first, it felt mechanical. Step, turn, pause, repeat. But the more we practiced, the harder it became to separate what was real from what wasn't. There was a moment, small, almost insignificant, when everything shifted. We were standing by the window, city lights stretching endlessly behind us. Look at me, he said. I did. Not like that. How else am I supposed to look at you? Like you trust me. I let out a quiet laugh. That might be a problem. Then pretend. Something in his tone made it sound like more than a suggestion. So I tried. Held his gaze. Let the tension settle instead of pulling away from it. Seconds passed. Too many. My heartbeat felt louder than it should. Better, he said quietly. But he didn't step back. And neither did I. That was the problem. We were supposed to be acting. Following a script. But scripts didn't account for moments like this. Moments where silence felt heavier than words. Where eye contact lasted too long. Where proximity stopped feeling like practice. And started feeling like something else. I turned away first. Of course I did. I think we've practiced enough for today, I said. Have we? Yes. Or are you avoiding something? I didn't answer. Because I didn't have one. Not one I was ready to admit. It started with a question. Unexpected. Unnecessary. And impossible to ignore. Why did you say yes? I looked up from where I was sitting, flipping through notes for the event. What? To this, he clarified. To me. I shrugged lightly. You asked. That's not an answer. It's enough of one. It's not the truth. I held his gaze for a moment longer than usual, then looked away. Maybe I was tired of being invisible. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just still. He didn't respond immediately. Didn't interrupt. Didn't dismiss it. He just let it exist. That's not something you are, he said finally. I let out a quiet breath. That's easy for you to say. No, he replied calmly. It's not. That made me look at him again. Really look this time. You think I don't understand that feeling, he continued. Being underestimated, overlooked, reduced to something smaller than what you are. I frowned slightly. You? Yes. I almost laughed. Almost. But something in his expression stopped me. This wasn't arrogance. This wasn't posturing. This was truth. They see what I've built now, he said. Not what it took to build it. There it was. The first crack. Subtle, but real. They didn't always take you seriously, I said slowly. No. And now. Now they have to. The simplicity of it made something shift in me. Because I understood that. More than I wanted to admit. We sat in silence for a moment. Then, they made you feel like you didn't belong, he said. It wasn't a question. No, I replied quietly. They made me feel like I was temporary. His gaze sharpened slightly. That's not the same thing. It is when you're the one being replaced. The words came out sharper than I intended. More personal. More real. I stood up, suddenly restless. I should go. You're avoiding again. I turned back, frustration rising. I'm not avoiding anything. You are. Why does it matter? Because if you walk into that wedding still carrying that, he said, stepping closer, they will see it. My chest tightened. And if they do, they win. The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. I looked at him, really looked this time. At the control, the calm, the way nothing about him felt uncertain. How do you do it? I asked quietly. Do what? Walk into a room like that, and not care what they think. A pause. Then, I don't walk in not caring, he said. I walk in knowing they don't get to decide my value. The words hit something deep. Something I hadn't been able to put into words myself. And you believe that? I asked. Yes. Always. A slight pause. Enough. That honesty. It mattered more than confidence would have. Because it was real. And for the first time since this arrangement started, it didn't feel like he was teaching me something. It felt like he was sharing something. Something earned. Something lived. The distance between us felt different now. Less structured. Less controlled. More human. And that's when I realized something dangerous. I wasn't just learning how to stand beside him. I was starting to understand him. And that made everything more complicated. Because understanding leads to connection. And connection was never part of the plan. I looked away, steadying myself. This is still just an arrangement, I said quietly. Yes. We're just playing roles. Yes. Nothing more. A pause. Then, if that's what you need it to be. My chest tightened, because something in his voice told me he didn't believe that anymore. And the worst part, I wasn't sure I did either. Somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like an act. The car slowed to a stop beneath the sweeping canopy of the hotel entrance. For a moment, neither of us moved. Through the tinted windows, I could already see them. Guests stepping out in tailored suits and designer gowns, cameras flashing, staff moving with quiet urgency. The kind of scene I had orchestrated countless times. But never like this. Never from this side. My fingers tightened slightly around my clutch. Last chance, he said calmly beside me. We can leave. I turned to look at him. His expression was unreadable, controlled, as if walking away or walking in made no difference to him at all. But it made a difference to me. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not leaving." A brief pause. Then he nodded once. "Good." The door opened, and everything changed. The moment my heel touched the ground, I felt it, the shift. Not subtle, not imagined. Real. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Eyes followed. I stepped out slowly, aware of every movement, every breath, every inch of space I occupied. The dress moved with me, smooth and effortless, exactly as it had been designed to. Not loud, not excessive, but impossible to ignore. Then he stepped out beside me. And suddenly, the attention sharpened. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was calculation. Recognition. Who is she? I didn't need to hear the whispers to know they were happening. I felt them. Every glance. Every pause. Every double take as people tried to place me, and failed. His hand found the small of my back. "Steady. Grounding. Walk," he murmured. So I did. Each step felt deliberate now. Controlled. Like I was moving through something thicker than air. The entrance doors opened, and we stepped into the reception hall. And the entire room seemed to tilt. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Soft music filled the space. Dozens of conversations unfolded in quiet elegance. And then, one by one, they stopped. Not completely, but enough. Enough to notice. Enough to feel. Eyes turned. Not to him. To me. My pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. I was supposed to blend in beside him, not stand out on my own. "I think people are staring," I whispered. "They are," he replied calmly. "That's not what we practiced." "No," he said, his voice lower now. "But you're adapting." I swallowed, forcing my shoulders back, my posture steady. "Keep walking," he added. "Like you belong here. Like I belong here." The words echoed in my mind as we moved deeper into the room. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending. It didn't take long. The whispers started before we even reached the center of the room. "Who is she?" "She's not from any of the families." "Do you know her name?" "No, but she's with him." That last part carried weight. With him. It bought me attention. But not acceptance. Not yet. A woman approached first, elegant, poised, the kind of presence that had spent years mastering polite judgment. Her smile was flawless. "Good evening," she said, her gaze landing on me just a second too long. "I don't believe we've met." I returned the smile, just as polished. "I don't believe we have." A pause. Then, "And you are." There it was. The test. I could feel it in the air, the expectation that I would stumble, hesitate, reveal something that would place me neatly back where they believed I belonged. But I didn't. I held her gaze. Steady. "I'm with him." Simple. Clean. Unapologetic. Her expression flickered, just briefly. Then she turned her attention to him, recalibrating. Of course she did. Because in rooms like this, hierarchy always corrected itself. But the damage was done. I had passed the first test. Barely. As we moved further in, the pressure built. It wasn't loud. It never was. It was quieter than that. A glance that lingered too long. A conversation that paused just as you approached. A compliment that wasn't really a compliment. "You look different. I wasn't expecting someone like you." How interesting. Each word wrapped in politeness. Each one carrying an edge. I felt it pressing in on me, testing the edges of my composure. And for a moment, just a moment, the old feeling crept back in. The instinct to shrink, to disappear, to step back into the safe, invisible version of myself. But then, his hand pressed slightly against my back. A reminder. Not of him, of what I had learned. I straightened, lifted my chin just a fraction higher, met their eyes instead of avoiding them. And something shifted again. Not completely, But enough. Because this time, when they looked at me, they hesitated. Not because they accepted me, but because they weren't sure they could dismiss me either. I saw her before she saw me. The bride. She stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a carefully curated circle of guests. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Perfect everything. The kind of perfection that came from never having to question your place. And beside her, him. The man who had invited him. The man who had expected to control this narrative. The moment stretched. Then she turned and saw us. Everything stopped. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But internally. I watched it happen. The flicker of confusion. Then recognition. Then something sharper. Her gaze moved from him to me and stayed there. He noticed. Of course he did. His expression didn't change immediately, but his posture did. Subtle. Barely there. A shift of weight. A tightening of the jaw. Then he stepped forward, approaching us. The room adjusted around him, making space, making way, because that's what people did for men like him. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone casual, but not quite. "I was invited," the man beside me replied smoothly. A pause. Then his eyes moved to me, slowly, assessing, dissecting. "And you brought a guest." Not a question. A statement. I felt the weight of it settle. This was the moment. The one everything had been building toward. I met his gaze. Didn't look away. "Yes," I said. Silence. The bride stepped forward then, her smile perfectly in place, but her eyes sharp. "You must be new," she said sweetly. There it was. The assumption. The quiet dismissal. I smiled back. "I am," I replied. "But I learn quickly." Her expression tightened, just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But I did. And so did he. The man beside me shifted his stance. Not stepping in. Not taking over. Just there. Letting me handle it. That was the difference. He wasn't here to speak for me. He was here to stand with me. The groom's gaze flickered between us. Something unsettled creeping in now. "This is unexpected," he said finally. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It seems like a lot of things tonight are." The words landed. Not harsh. Not aggressive. But sharp enough. And just like that, the balance shifted. Not completely, but enough. Because for the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative anymore. It happened slowly. Then all at once. The tension that had been building throughout the room began to change shape. Curiosity replaced judgment. Interest replaced dismissal. People started watching me differently. Not as an outsider trying to belong, but as someone they needed to understand. I didn't force it. Didn't push. I just moved. Through conversations. Through interactions. Through the space. Exactly the way I had practiced. But this time, it wasn't practice. It was instinct. A laugh here. A perfectly timed response there. A glance held just long enough. Confidence, not performed, but felt. And people noticed. Of course they did. Because confidence like that doesn't come from pretending. It comes from knowing. And for the first time, I did. At some point, I realized something. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not even to myself. I was just existing. Fully. Unapologetically. And that was enough. More than enough. I caught glimpses of it as the night unfolded. The way conversations shifted when I joined them. The way people leaned in when I spoke. The way their tone changed, subtly but undeniably. Respect. Not given. Earned. The bride noticed it too. I saw it in the way her attention kept returning to me. In the way her smile tightened just a fraction more each time. And the groom. He stopped trying to read me. Because he couldn't. That was the final shift. The moment everything locked into place. Because I wasn't the same person who walked in. And they could feel it. even if they didn't understand it. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. He had been watching the entire time. Not interfering. Not guiding. Just observing. And there it was. Something new. Something unguarded. Pride. Not in what I was doing, but in who I had become. My breath caught for a second. Because that look, that wasn't part of the plan. None of this was. And suddenly, the room didn't matter anymore. The whispers. The judgment. The entire reason we were here. It all faded. Because the biggest shift that night wasn't happening around me. It was happening between us. And that was the most dangerous part of all. But the biggest surprise that night wasn't them. It was him. The balcony door clicked shut behind us, leaving the murmur of the wedding reception fading into a soft, distant hum. The cool night air washed over me, carrying with it the faint scent of the river below and the faint perfume of flowers from the hall. I pressed my palms against the railing, leaning slightly forward, as if the space between me and the glittering city could help me steady the whirlwind inside. He stayed a few steps behind, silent, letting me breathe. I could hear the faint shuffle of his shoes on the stone tiles, deliberate, measured, like every step was considered. "I should have left you in there," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved closer, the distance shrinking slowly but unmistakably. His presence was heavy, not oppressive, but inescapable. Every instinct I had screamed at me, and yet something about the way he existed in that space made me stop second-guessing. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he finally said. I turned to face him. His expression was calm, controlled, but there was something in his eyes, something that flickered like candlelight behind ice. "Why me?" I asked, the question spilling out before I could temper it. "Why did you choose me? Of all people?" He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing the words that had been carefully contained for months. Then he smiled. Just slightly. Not for charm, not for effect, but for something genuine. "I noticed you a long time ago," he said quietly. "Before you ever came near me, before you stepped into that lobby, before you ever thought about this arrangement. I saw you." I blinked. "Saw me?" "Yes," he said. "The way you move. The way you observe. The way you care about details no one else notices. You don't realize it, but it sets you apart. Always has." I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten. "And that made you want me to be your date?" "No," he replied immediately. "That would make it sound like it was calculated. This wasn't calculated. This was never random." I stared at him, the words echoing in my mind. All the practice, the closeness, the rehearsed touches, it had never been random? He stepped closer again, the gap between us narrowing until I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I could have asked anyone who fit the image. But I didn't. Because you stand out without trying. And that's something that can't be taught, or staged, or bought. I looked down at my hands gripping the railing, my body stiff, my heart hammering. "So, all of this," I whispered, "wasn't just an act for the wedding?" He tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. "It started as an act. We had roles to play. But from the moment you agreed, it became real for me. Every step, every glance, every moment, real." My throat went dry. The cool night air felt heavier now, charged with unspoken truths and the weight of months I hadn't known I was waiting for. I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he said softly. "Just understand that you weren't a convenience. You weren't a choice of the moment. You mattered. You always have." The words struck me harder than any compliment, any reassurance I had ever been given. Because they weren't about my accomplishments, my looks, or the way I carried myself in the room. They were about me. I looked up, finally meeting his gaze fully, and something shifted inside me. Vulnerability I had carefully hidden for years pooled to the surface. The careful mask I had worn, the one that made me stand strong, competent, untouchable, slipped in an instant. I've spent so long pretending, I admitted, my voice trembling just slightly. Pretending I'm fine. Pretending I belong. Pretending I'm enough. I didn't know anyone could ever see me for who I really am. He took another careful step forward, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him without feeling threatened. I see you, he said simply. Not what you do, not where you've been, not what anyone else expects. Just you. Catherine. The sound of my name on his lips sent a ripple through me I hadn't anticipated. The tension that had been holding me tight for months, the rehearsals, the fake smiles, the careful choreography, suddenly became meaningless. All that mattered was the undeniable truth between us. I exhaled slowly, letting the air carry away my doubt, my fear, my self-imposed rules. And you really meant everything tonight? Every glance, every touch. He nodded once. Every moment. I've never pretended with you. Not once. I swallowed, the realization hitting me like a wave. The man beside me, the one who could command rooms with his presence, the one whose reputation preceded him like a storm, had chosen me. Not for appearances. Not for strategy. Not for convenience. For me. The thought made my chest ache. My hands, which had been gripping the railing, loosened as warmth spread through me. I took a tentative step closer. He didn't pull back. I don't know what to do with that, I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Then just be here, he said. Right now. That's enough. And in that silence, the world narrowed until it was just the two of us. The city lights stretched endlessly behind us, but I barely noticed them. My focus was entirely on him. The line between our practiced roles and the truth had vanished. I laughed quietly, a little breathless, a little unsteady. I guess this wasn't supposed to happen. No, he said softly. It wasn't. But it did. Then, gently, he reached out. Not a hand to guide me, not a command, but an invitation. His fingers brushed mine for the first time outside the rehearsed touches. A spark shot through me, undeniable, irrepressible. I looked into his eyes and understood, fully, without words, this wasn't pretending. Not anymore. Not for him. Not for me. Before I could stop myself, I closed the last fraction of space between us, and he met me halfway. Our lips touched briefly, lightly, a single confirmation of everything unspoken. Not urgent. Not desperate. Just real. The world around us seemed to pause. The distant music of the wedding, the soft murmur of guests inside, it all faded. There was only this truth, only this moment. When we finally pulled apart slightly, just enough to breathe, I realized it. Not with my head. Not with my heart. But with everything in me. This wasn't about appearances. This wasn't about the wedding. This wasn't even about him protecting me or making a statement. It was about us. And in that moment, I realized I was never just his fake date. Months had passed since that night on the balcony. Life had shifted in ways I couldn't have imagined. The carefully rehearsed roles, the fake touches, the whispered instructions, they were gone. Replaced by something real, something steady. Something we both wanted. Jihan and I had settled into a rhythm, a life that felt ours. Weekends spent exploring galleries, quiet dinners in apartments that felt like home, laughter spilling freely in spaces that once felt intimidating. We learned each other's habits, the small gestures that revealed comfort and trust, the ways silence could speak volumes. There were still moments when my insecurities tried to creep back. The old fear of not being enough, not fitting in, not belonging. But now, I had someone beside me who reminded me, without ever needing to say it, that I was already more than enough. The world outside didn't matter the way it once did. Invitations to exclusive events no longer carried pressure, they carried opportunity. I moved through spaces with confidence now, not as someone pretending to belong, but as someone who truly did. And when I walked beside Jihan, his hand at my waist, his eyes attentive to mine, the past no longer held any weight. One evening, we returned to the same hotel where everything had begun. The grand doors, the chandeliers, the soft murmur of an event in progress. It was familiar, but the memory was different this time. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't his fake date. We stepped inside together. Guests looked our way, noticing, whispering, but this time it felt empowering. We moved with ease, natural intimacy, radiating something undeniable. For the first time, the symmetry struck me. The room that had once reminded me of everything I lacked was now the place that reflected everything I had gained. We paused near the balcony, the same one where confessions had been made, truths revealed, and hearts opened. I took his hand, and he looked at me, steady, sure, unwavering. The space between us no longer carried tension, only warmth. I agreed to be his fake date, I whispered softly, a smile tugging at my lips, but I became the woman he chose for real. Sometimes, the moments that feel like failure, like rejection, like invisibility, are exactly what lead you to where you are meant to be. Sometimes, the doors that seem closed, the roles that feel forced, the relationships that feel temporary, open into something lasting, real, transformative. If you've ever doubted your worth, felt unseen, or been underestimated, remember this. The world notices what you refuse to hide, even if it's only visible to the one paying attention. Your story, your courage, your persistence, it matters. And sometimes, the moment you feel invisible is the moment your story is about to be seen by the world.